For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Doctor. I think that most of the markets yesterday were waiting to hear what the chairman of the Fed, Jerome Powell, would actually say. And when he did say something, he seemed to imply that that any rate rises in the United States in December would be slightly smaller than people had expected. So in other words, the aggressive rate rises, it appears, are coming to an end. And therefore, the Asian markets actually quite like that. The Hang Seng closing up 2.5%, Shanghai Composite up about 1%, the Shenzhen component about almost 2%. Now, those last two Chinese markets sort of tie in what I'm sort of getting from a number of fund managers. They seem to think, and they only seem to think, and this is just a suspicion, that maybe the regulations for tech companies are getting slightly softer in China, and that's giving people a lot of hope. However, against that, there is still aggression from the United States. The Commerce Secretary has just been saying that the country has been forced to defend the US against and its workers against China and its allies and partners and so on. The global system, China is beginning to game the global system, as they put it, by stacking Chinese representatives on international technology standard-setting bodies to promote the country's values and spread its influence. So that's really that aggression is still there as far as the trade relations between the United States and China is concerned. So as I was saying then, the Fed chair, Jay Powell, said that smaller interest rate hikes could actually start in December. He sort of confirmed that, but he also cautioned that monetary policy, as he put it, is likely to stay restrictive. We will stay the course until the job is done. Wall Street actually like that. The Dow up 737 points in normal trading, so like that. Elon Musk has met Tim Cook, who's the head of Apple, and between them, they have sort of got a piece going between them, saying Apple never considered removing Twitter from it, and so on. It's a significant de-escalation as far as Musk concerns, and among other things, he's saying, this is Musk, among other things, we resolved the misunderstandings about Twitter potentially being removed from the App Store. I would like to add something to that, though. The fact that also the EU and the United States are both actually taking a very close look at Twitter and all social media centers. Twitter must fly by the EU rules. And Janet Yellen has got involved now, saying that the SEC is probably going to take a look at Elon Musk's proposed takeover of Twitter. So, as I suspected, more regulation heading social media's way. The former FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried appeared. He appeared on a sort of summit, which is organised by a particular newspaper, just weeks after FTX filed for bankruptcy protection. And he said he was down the line, as it were, not actually standing physically in front of people, and saying that he didn't commit any fraud and so on, but I suspect that probably has to wind its way down. As far as the UK is concerned, Rishi Sunak has set up a special strikes unit. Now, we've got a lot of bad things happening before the winter as far as social services are concerned. Nurses on strike, trains on strike, Royal Mail on strike. These public service sectors are beginning to look at inflation and say, why don't our wage rises get that? Why aren't they commensurate with that? So the Prime Minister is setting up a strikes unit. Also, the UK taxman, rather disappointingly, has lowered the target for recovering. Do you remember we talked about that money that was immediately thrown out towards businesses, support to eat out for less and all the rest of it. And the COVID schemes, they think there was about £5.8 billion spent on that. Now they're thinking they're probably only going to get about 1.1 billion of it back. As far as oil's concerned, it's important to note that the White House is apparently weighing future releases from the US inventory for crude oil reserves. Industry heating inventories have risen very, very slightly indeed. Heating oil up 54% in the energy traders, though, basically not worrying too much about that. More is the OPEC Plus meeting on December the 4th, which begins next week. And that will talk about whether or not they've decided to cut production. And still, the real big guess is about how powerful China's recovery is going to be, and what the effect of the Russian crude price cap will be on the market. So lots of moving parts, and quite honestly, relatively volatile oil markets at the moment. But do remember that Goldman Sachs were only saying a couple of days ago they're sticking by their eventual target as 2022 turns into 2023 of $110 of a barrel of oil. That is the global view.
Two things. Number one, don't you think that Rishi Sunak and his cabinet really did losing it as regards, the way to buffer this economy? Because there's been a lot of mistakes and missteps. At first, like yesterday, we talked about them trying to lax things on the banks and things like that. Now, they can't meet their targets any longer, they said. Thirdly, they've not been able to tell us the extent of this black hole. They've just put a number on it, 55 billion, that keeps shifting. Fourthly, the economy is not, rebounding the way we want it to rebound. And it's a bleak Christmas. And anyway, happy new month to you, the 1st of December. So what do you think that Rishi can still do to some sort of stimulate growth, but at the same time still make those necessary cuts and those, those matters that emerge from that mini budget by Kwesi Kwarteng and the likes, but still stimulate growth? Because if you are being hardlined and you're not still stimulating growth in the economy, then there's no prospect for the economy. Then it's going to be bad news for the Tory government. That's one. Number two, the EU now and other bodies around the world are kicking hard on Elon Musk. They're saying you can't just have a free speech nation like you want it to be, and you are making Twitter more toxic. When is Musk going to stop on all of this?
Shall we do Elon Musk first? As I've been saying over the past few days, I'm unsurprised by the fact that both the EU and now the US are actually really saying, do you know what? We actually will take a close look at this. That there is no room, or you can have freewheeling free speech if you want it, but do understand there are a lot of very nasty people out there, as well as the relatively good. So free speech sounds really wonderful, but actually, if it's freewheeling free speech and it allows anybody to say what they like on social media, I suspect that probably the regulators will take a very dim view of that. Certainly, I think parents of children probably would as well. And I don't want to go particularly down that route. I'm just saying that freewheeling free speech, well, you can have it if you want it, but everything comes with a cost. As far as the UK is concerned, I think it's going to be a very tough Christmas indeed. What you go for under these circumstances, as I understand it, is a degree of financial orthodoxy. So Sunak is saying, or Sunak plus Jeremy Hunt, the finance minister, the chancellor, as we call him, are both saying, let's deal with inflation first, and then we'll deal with the recovery. I suspect that inflation, because remember that inflation just measures the rate of price increases. It does not measure the cost of living. So in other words, I think things are going to remain very expensive. We just have to deal with it. And as far as the energy crisis is concerned, it's not so much this winter, but next winter people are worrying about. So I think 2023 is going to be pretty bare bones. I think if you really want to draw me towards what the public sector needs to happen to it, I think that unfortunately you have to say to them, realistically, there is no money tree. We've done our best, but honestly, if you're in the public service, you have to recognise that your income will not match some of what is available in the private sector, but when you retire, the taxpayers look after your pension. That's the go-to argument about public services, no matter whether their pay increases actually keep up with inflation or not. And of course, if you're doubling down on inflation, then all those arguments go out the window and you start again.
Well, certainly we haven't had the last on, Elon Musk and his Twitter, what was described in one report as a freewheeling space for free speech, and that is not acceptable to the European Commission. The European Commissioner on Digital Rules has made it very clear to Elon Musk that, look, he has to follow a protocol of strict rules. Otherwise, there will be fines, including 6% of the global turnover of Twitter. And in the US, of course, Janet Yellen is saying that the Committee on Foreign Investment is already raising concerns about the fact that the Saudis own, through the Kingdom Holding Company, about 5.5% of Twitter. I don't think we've had the last of it. As for Bankman Fried, or what's his name, Sam Bankman-Fried, he says he did not commit any fraud. Then when John Jay took over last month, the new FTS CEO, what he was saying is that what he meant is a complete failure of controls, complete lack of transparent information. And Bankman Fried was telling the New York Times that he doesn't even remember he has ever lied in his life. But he has caused so much agony for a lot of people, disruption in the crypto industry. The major 50 creditors, he's owing them over $3 billion, and he says he has not committed fraud. So what has he done? Anyway, to two basic issues I wanted you to comment on. One, the Financial Times is saying this morning that Marlboro, luxury handbag makers are saying because there is a VAT in place in the UK for items, that many tourists are now going to Europe for shopping, and that their company has even lost about 1% of profit, and other companies have also made other losses. So tourists are going elsewhere. Your comment on that. Then secondly, it looks like truly a winter of discontent in the UK. The Unison, the Unite, and other trade unions, there will be strikes every day until after Christmas. The Royal Mail workers, 115,000 of them, their 48-hour strike continues today. Other groups, nurses, they are all going to join. So the government, as you pointed out, has set up a strikes unit. He's talking about minimum service regulation. It looks like the Sunak administration does not even want to talk to these public sector workers. It's like government is saying, just take it or leave it. Would that end in joy for all parties concerned?
Right, so you've raised 5 separate issues there. Do you want me to comment on all of them, or just the last 2?
No, anyone you want to talk about.
Okay, Twitter, freewheeling, free speech, yeah, okay, fine. If you want it, that's fine, but do understand that it's not necessarily going to be very pretty, a lot of it, and it will come under all sorts of influences, hence the need for regulation, and there will be regulation, and both the EU and the US are saying that it's going to be, and the SEC are now involved. As far as Sam Bankman-Fried is concerned, the only thing that I would wish to comment on that, he says he didn't commit any fraud. Who knows? What it does show is that the company itself, FTX, had no risk management about it. So it appears at the moment. And I did say about a week ago that the first voicings from a lawyer involved in the bankruptcy was it's a very, very different kind of animal. What kind of animal it is? To be a lawyer. To be a lawyer and laughing all the way to the bank. That's probably what you do as far as this is concerned. The Mulberry, I don't have an enormous amount of sympathy with fashion houses. I mean, Roger Saul comes and goes, quite honestly. He's done very, very well with the company over the past 40 years. And what they're asking for is an exemption from VAT, as I understand it. Well, they simply aren't going to get that. People of that kind of level and that kind of shopping ability will shop wherever they like in the world. It doesn't matter the fact that they are perhaps going to Europe, perhaps not, perhaps going to Dubai, who knows where they go. It's upper end purchases, and quite honestly, it's not, and nor is it a massive part of the actual manufacture of clothes, which, as far as I'm concerned, takes place in the Far East in any case. And as far as what else have we got? The public sector workers in the UK. I mean, it is going to be very, very difficult indeed. At least Sunak has realised that it needs a task force. These people need to be brought to the table and saying, what can you realistically expect? And deals can be done. There may be deals that happen in the future, but the union leaders do need to be made to understand that life is going to be very, very tough. And it's going to be very tough for everybody. And don't even get me started on the National Health Service, which is actually going to have to one day, and it probably won't even be in my lifetime. But I think those of us who can afford it will need to pay for this, because it is so out of date. And the politicians just think throwing money at these kind of things is going to work. It doesn't. It needs a huge overhaul. And I feel that people who can afford to it will pay. I think that the rail service in this country will be shunned by people who will just say, do you know what? If I can't depend upon it, I won't use it. I'll work from home. This is what these people are forgetting. We're moving into a different kind of world right now.
Well, thank you very much, Michael Wilson. Now for business updates across the African continent, Rochus Udiri joins us.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning to all our viewers. Yeah, we begin with the Central Bank of Nigeria. They've released some new guidelines with respect to approvals for banking licenses. So these new guidelines are taking into consideration the anti-money laundering, combating the financing of terrorism, and countering proliferation, financing of weapons of mass destruction. So essentially, the guidelines, and this is for pending approvals that are already, or rather, applications for bank licenses that are already pending, and then new ones that are going to be put forward. So they're taking a further look into insecurity and the criminal history, if any, of backers of these financial institutions that are seeking to get a license. So if a backer of one of these institutions that's looking to get a license, for instance, has sanctions from another country, that might impact the application. They're also, again, as I mentioned, the whole issue of insecurity, weapons proliferation, things like that. They're going to be taking a more stringent look at that. And this is essentially the central bank reminding Nigerians that they can, walk and chew gum at the same time, from having the RT200 seminar, where they're talking about non-oil exports, to everything they've done from trying to support healthcare, agriculture, power, and so on. They are still the regulator of the financial services sector, and their eye is still on the ball, essentially. And you look at the financial services, the activity on the stock exchange, you look at the amount of capital coming in there, that's still far and away a sector that's pretty healthy and still being, protected by the central bank. So from finance, we move to oil and gas. Chief Timipre Silva, Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, he essentially was quoted by Reuters as saying that petrol imports should end by the third quarter of next year. He's basing this on the Port Harcourt refinery partially coming on stream. I think with that partial onboarding should be about 60,000 barrels per day. He says, worry, it would be later as well. There's no word yet on the Kaduna refinery. Also, of course, hedging his bets on the Dangote refinery to come on stream by the first quarter of next year. If all this comes through, Nigeria will be saving so much money on importation, particularly on foreign exchange. The foreign exchange cost of bringing in these petroleum products into the country. So it's if we're on target, then good for us. But of course, like I don't know if you've heard the Sunshine Anderson song, heard it all before. These promises have been made in the past, and of course, he won't be here in the new year because you've got an election, you've got a handover of power, you've got a new cabinet that's going to be called into play. You've got, of course, the Petroleum Industry Act, which calls for the end of fuel subsidies and so on and so forth. So we'll have to see when we get there if that actually happens. But I mean, if we end the importation of petroleum products, big game changer. Whether or not that impacts the price, we've argued this several times. Fully working refineries will not necessarily mean that if you deregulate the downstream sector, that all of a sudden you're going to have prices remaining at 165, 185. Anyway, they're all selling at over 200. Well, not all, but most are selling at over 200. Some selling over 200 now because of the fuel scarcity issue. So that's still something that needs to be addressed. South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa could possibly face a hearing, that's an impeachment hearing, because there's a new report that says that he may have broken the law with respect to that. I think it was $580,000 $580,000 that was stolen from one of his farms. They're calling it Farm Gates, which is the whole Gates for conspiracies and so on. Not conspiracies, excuse me, scandals. So the Parliament, I believe, is going to debate this week whether the hearing can push forward, and if it does, then he actually could face impeachment. And if you think about South Africa, we just talked about their unemployment numbers yesterday. I think this month we're going to get third quarter GDP figures. They've got the load shedding issues. They got to have the president impeached at this particular time. While I would celebrate, the rule of law and, the South Africans taking everybody to task and having no sacred cows, for the economy, that would could throw things into a tailspin. And speaking of tailspins, Moody's has cut Ghana's debt further into junk territory. It was already in junk territory because of their debt issues and ability to pay back. You know that Ghana is talking to bondholders right now and telling them to possibly take a haircut, which means take a loss on what is due to them, due to the fact that they are negotiating with the IMF for more money and so on and so forth. So, this just, it sours the outlook for Ghanaian debt. And also, you would think that Moody's would take into account all that's been going on, the hiking of the interest rate, base interest rate, because the way inflation is and so on and so forth, and the measures that the government is taking. None seem to impact their outlook. So Ghana is still facing headwinds, and that's our updates for Africa.
Ghana is facing headwinds. Let me start from Nigeria. I'll be really excited if we truly, and in the spirit of songs this morning, if we can truly make that move like Shalimar says.
Oh, yes.
And it's a Friday. I keep thinking today's a Friday. It's a Thursday anyway.
Yes, we're almost there.
Make that move as regards, finally building the refinery or getting them back on stream to be able to buffer the effect of this import and all of that. So we're looking forward to that. But the sad thing is, Mr. Timi Silva might not still be in charge by Q3 2023.
Right.
So we can't hold him accountable.
Right.
So maybe he just said that. But I'll be happy because I want us to refine within. It will lower cost. It will help us a great deal. We'll be able to do a lot more. A lot of smaller countries are refining within. And there's so much prospect. We can also sell if we have access to others. But I want to go to Ghana.
Yeah.
It's shocking that Ghana has gone this route. Their debt's now junk. But Ghana caused most of the problem Ghana faced.
Indeed.
And you see, I always say, Rotus, culture will eat strategy for breakfast. I'm sure you know that in the early 2000s, Ghana was at this same point. And there was a debt management program they entered into that reduced their debts then to about 25% of GDP.
Yep.
But from that time, since 2007, They have grown their debt now to 88% of GDP.
Now, COVID was part of that. We should not forget that there was a lot of COVID
No, it wasn't
spending.
COVID.
It was now.
I'll give you the joker.
There was.
Road tools, I'll give you the joker.
Yeah.
Go and research it. The major problem was the fact that they bet too big on their oil sector, issued out a lot of contracts. When those contracts went bust, the government now had to buy back those shares to the tune of $1.1 billion.
Yeah, dollars, right?
Dollars.
But cocoa is still their main export.
So it really impacted their books.
Yeah.
Coupled with the normal administrative shenanigan that went wrong, then COVID now enter. But that 1.1 billion was a big sinking hole in their book, and you know the government wasn't raising revenue.
Right.
All right. So obviously, as the government wasn't raising revenue, and that was why they tried methods like the e-levy and things like that never passed and all of that. So Ghana needs to look back and see what it did not do properly to be able to do it. And Charlie, if Ghana does it, they can grow. But that was what really, those buyback of those licenses to the tune of $1.1 billion was really what cascaded Ghana into this problem. The big hole in their books.
Okay. A number of issues. Yes, I mentioned this story about the Minister of State for Petroleum yesterday. All these promises about when the refineries will start functioning, we have had it before.
Yep.
So there's a ring of deja vu to it. But the truth of the matter, of course, is that the future of these refineries is no longer up to the present administration. Effectively, the Buhari administration, you could say, is lame duck.
Yeah.
You know, how many months to go? By February, you will have a new president, a new administration. You know, everybody will know the direction in which we're going. And there have been some of these presidential candidates who have been saying that they don't, in fact, want to bother about those refineries. They want to privatize them. So the future of the refinery will depend on what the next administration decides. But the record we have in place is that many of these, most of these refineries have been operating at a loss. The only thing people can hold on to is the expectation that the Dangote refinery will make a difference. However, there's something you can hold on to for now in the oil and gas sector in terms of oil production, crude oil production. Now it went down at a point. The CBN governor even said, oh, you know, we're getting $0 into, you know, in terms of revenue from that sector. But since July, there's been an improvement. We shall, going back to the Forcados terminal. And now we are told that we have up to 1.3 million barrels per day in terms of crude oil production. The expectation in that regard is that Nigeria, over time, you know, if this is sustained, will be able to meet its quota. OPEC quota. So that's the concrete thing you can hold on to. Everything else is just rhetoric. Now, secondly, as for South Africa, yes, President Cyril Ramaphosa, don't forget that this particular case was brought to the fore by a gentleman called Fraser, a loyalist of President Jacob Zuma, who has his own
Court case.
corruption matters, you know, that is still out there. So Fraser now came in June and said, look, even President Cyril Ramaphosa is not clean. That if you find up to about 4 million pounds or so on his farm, that in itself is a violation of foreign exchange laws of South Africa. That's the issue. And it's called Farmgate, the Farmgate scandal, the Falafala farm scandal. But the issue now is the timing of it. Cyril Ramaphosa wants to be a second-term president of the ANC, the African National Congress. I think the executive meeting is this week. The vote will be next month. And then this has come up again. So even if there are impeachment proceedings, whether those proceedings succeed or not, his record, you know, his show that he's an anti-corruption president will have been severely tainted. So that is where the problem is. So there may be the law on one side, but there's also the element of politics and the internal wranglings within the ANC as a dominant element in the Farmgate scandal. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.